that Chinese leaders do, they would probably act in the same way.
I think what we're going to see next is, and I think we should talk about what we think will happen next with China. I think China's on the brink of having a revolution. If you look at what happened to the Uyghurs, obviously you can't practice religion there. Students in Hong Kong can't protest. You can't publish what you want. Founders can't start companies. Now you're not going to be able to play video games as much as you want. You can't use social media. And today, you can't have any control over your finance. If you squeeze people across this many vectors, this hard, this quickly, I think Friedberg's right. It could result in massive...
China's not like a uniform people and a uniform culture.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, I just listed like 7 or 8 things they're doing to
But there are many provinces, many cultures, many differences of experience, by the way. I mean, the rural population in China doesn't experience much of what I think is driving industry and driving this inequality and perceived inequality and the changes that are underway. I don't think that a revolution is generally supported unless you have, enough kind of concentrated swell across the population. I don't know how you could see something like that happening in as diverse a population as China.
I support China's limits on social media use by children. I could use that here for my kids.
Clearly, Sacks is letting his kids use whatever they want. I mean, we definitely need to have some of those over here. Balaji, what do you think is going to happen, worst case, best case for China in the next 2 decades?
Well, so one thought I wanted to give is basically that in some ways, this is inevitable because China and India are 35% of the world. Asia was the center of the world. And one way of thinking about it is that America and the West executed extremely well over the last couple of centuries, and Asia didn't with socialism and communism. And now that they've actually got a better OS, it's not like the US really could restrain them, So in that sense, that's also part of their internal narrative in a way. I mean, of course, Mao killed millions of people there. They screwed up their own stuff. But their narrative is they were colonized by the West, and the Opium Wars are patronized as copycats, emasculated on film. For decades, they're like heads down in sweatshops. They built plastic stuff. They took orders from all these overseas guys, and now it's their time to stand up and take back their rightful position in the world. And that's their narrative. And so it's important to not agree with it, but at least understand where it's coming from, because they want it more, I think. And so I disagree, Jason, with your view that they're going to have a revolution. I think that's a Western mindset where, Australia, for example, is having these COVID protests. In China, the harder the crackdown, the less more crackdown, like the easier it makes the next crackdown. It's something where
it's not going to be an easy revolution, that's for sure. But we saw protests. You saw Tiananmen Square. You saw Hong Kong, and you're going to see Taiwan.
Anything since that was 30 years ago.
It's still proof positive that if you squeeze people, they will take to the streets.
Jason, remember the quality of life in China has accelerated at such a pace over the past 30 years. The average person in China is so much better off than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Revolutions don't come out of that amount of progress, right? When you go from $4,000 a year in average income to $20,000 a year in average income.
What happens if they don't have jobs in the recession?
The only time you revolt is because of economics.
That's what I just said. So what happens if there's if they have a
they're growing at
crash?
8% a year. The GDP is growing 8% a year. The population is seeing an incredible benefit.
Okay,
and
what if that reverses? What if that reverses? Would you see a revolution then?
Well, J-Cal, I mean, look, I think we, to Balaji's point about this is like a Western mindset. I mean, think about the Arab Spring. We saw all those revolutions with the Arab Spring. And we thought, oh, look, they're finally throwing off the yoke of oppression, and now they're going to set up democratic states. And what did we actually get? We actually got religious fundamentalism, right? Like, we didn't get what we thought. And I think this happens over and over again, is that we're trying to superimpose our mindset on them. We're thinking like, frankly, a Davos man.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking
people want security, by the way, and security can come in a lot of different forms, and religious fundamentalism is one of them. And the way that we see kind of government operate in China may seem foreign and uncomfortable to us, but it provides enough security to people to know they're going to have housing, shelter, food, medicine, and be able to do the things that they want to do to some extent and some limit. It's not necessarily an equation that says all humans that don't live like Americans are going to be unhappy.
Yeah. Last thing I'll just say is basically, I think the idea that China will collapse from internal revolution or, the US military is like really strong relative to China, I think are both actually forms of wishful thinking. With that said, I do believe that we need a strategy for China on a global scale. I think the future is a centralized East and a decentralized West. But I don't think it's going to be just, hey, Deus Ex Machina is going to solve this problem.
No, I don't think the revolution is going to necessarily overturn China. I think you're going to see revolutionary moments.
Well, so just to say one thing in your defense, J. Cal, because everyone's kind of beating up on you, is I
didn't mean it was beating up, by the way.
No.
Sacks is defending J. Cal. What's going on?
No. I want to.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a guarantee of revolution, but I think there's going to be some social unrest.
Yeah, well, look, the one way in which I agree with J. Cal is I do think that freedom ultimately is the birthright of every human, regardless of where you're born, who you are, what culture you are. But I think the thing that the United States has learned over the last 20 years is the road from here to there is going to be much more complicated than we think.
And longer.
And cultures are very stubborn things, and they're not going away anytime soon. And the transition is going to have to happen within those cultures. It's not something that we can superimpose.
By the way, I would also point out freedom is the birthright and the want of a people that at some point have enough security to feel like they have that luxury. Up until that point, I think that you have to make the decision of, does security give me more than freedom? And in a lot of cases, security, coming with all the costs it comes with, may give people more than absolute freedom. And that's a transitionary phase, I think, a lot of peoples go through, peoples being civilizations and states and whatnot.
Anybody have a prediction of what's going to happen in the next 20 years, or we'll move on to the next?
I just can't believe Sacks was empathetic to your point, J. Cal. That was a great moment.
It's really insane, actually.
I have a few predictions.
Yeah.
I think actually, if you read, The Kill Chain or similar books, that's by, I think, Christian Bros. It's a good book where basically it's like, the U.S. military has a perfect record in its war games with China. China's won every round. And, if you look at just the fact that with COVID, the U.S. military basically suffered a military defeat in the sense that it had this whole biodefense program. It's supposed to protect against biological weapons. That didn't work. Afghanistan, huge defeat, $2 trillion. You have this AUKUS thing where it looks like France is now pulling off and, from NATO, or the EU is doing their own thing. I think that China is, and then China's really already predominant in many ways in Asia. And the US just doesn't care about the area as much. I mean, who wants to start another gigantic war over this? Certainly, I don't think the people of America do, after 20 years of forever war. And China really cares about Taiwan. They really care about their backyard. So whether that's a war or whether that's a referendum on Taiwan or whether it's some unpredictable event like COVID, I don't know. But I do think that China does have some Monroe Doctrine-like thing that it gets to within Asia. Where basically it says, just like the US said, hey, we're running this hemisphere. They're saying, hey, we're running this sector of things. Whether that's a military conflict where the US decides to just withdraw, I don't know. And then I think what has to happen is we have to figure out what the decentralized West looks like. An asymmetric response to China, because it's going to basically be the number one centralized state in the world. You're not going to be able to combat it head on militarily. It's just, it's got like 10x growth in front of it, and it's already a monster. Unless there's some assassination or revolution or something crazy like that that's hard to predict. If it manages what it's got like, it's like Google 2010. It's got 10 years of that in front of it. And whether it's a Chinese decade or a Chinese century, I think depends on whether we can build the technologies to defend freedom, meaning like encryption, meaning, decentralized social networks, meaning these kinds of things. Because that's only, I think, kinds of tools that are going to help us, whether it's drones, whether it's other kinds of things, asymmetric defense versus what they're going to be. It's not going to just be a Deus